When my daughter's friends raised their glasses at her baby shower, she introduced me with a bright smile. "This is my roommate, Linda." The room filled with polite laughter, but I felt my stomach drop. Just last year, I sold my home, moved in with her, and poured every bit of myself into helping her through her pregnancy. I smiled back that day, but I wasn't the helpless roommate she thought I was. A few weeks later, in front of the same crowd, I brought something far more powerful than words: the deed. I was 62 when I moved into my daughter's home. It was the kind of decision you don't imagine making after a lifetime of working hard, paying bills, and keeping your own space. But after my husband passed, the big house we'd shared for decades became more of a quiet echo chamber than a home. Emily, my only daughter, had called one afternoon, her voice full of warmth, asking me to move in. "It'll be perfect, Mom," she said. "You can help me during the pregnancy, and it'll be good for you not to be alone." It sounded like an invitation of love, and honestly, I wanted to feel needed again. Emily was 32, expecting her first baby, and her husband Jake worked long hours. I sold my house, the one my husband and I built together brick by brick, and handed over most of the proceeds to help them with their mortgage. It felt right. Family helps family. The first few weeks were a pleasant rhythm. I cooked dinners in their open kitchen, the scent of roasted chicken and fresh herbs filling the air by the time Jake came home. I'd fold laundry in the afternoons, humming to myself while Emily rested. Some mornings she'd smile at me across the breakfast table, rubbing her belly, saying, "I don't know what I'd do without you, Mom." Jake was polite, if a little reserved. He always thanked me for dinner and sometimes left a coffee cup out for me in the mornings. I told myself he just needed time to adjust. We all did. I had imagined this season as a quiet blessing, a chance to grow closer to Emily and be there when my grandchild arrived. I thought I had found a purpose again, but slowly, small things began to shift. It happened the first time in the grocery store. Emily ran into a friend, a tall brunette named Claire. They chatted while I browsed the apples nearby. I wasn't paying much attention until Claire asked how Emily's mom was doing. Emily gave a quick smile, waved toward me, and said lightly, "Oh, that's my roommate, Linda." Roommate. The word landed like a pebble in my chest. I told myself it was a joke, a little playful banter. Claire laughed politely and the conversation moved on. I smiled too, pretending I didn't care. But on the drive home, the word lingered in my mind. Then came the second sign. One evening, after I'd finished cleaning up the kitchen, Emily came in with a sheepish look. "Mom, I was thinking, since I'm pregnant, I really want to keep the kitchen super clean at night. Maybe it's better if you don't use the stove after 8, just so I can rest and not smell strong foods." I nodded. "Of course, honey." It wasn't unreasonable. I told myself this was just about her comfort, but it felt odd being told when I could use the kitchen in a house I had helped pay for. The third sign came from Jake. One weekend afternoon, we were all in the living room when he said with a laugh, "Linda's making herself comfortable while she's staying here." He said it casually, like it was nothing, but there was an undertone, as if my place here was temporary. I laughed along, but there was a small knot forming in my chest. I started noticing how they referred to my space in the house. It wasn't Mom's room, it was the guest room. Still, I brushed it off. I didn't want to seem sensitive. I'd tell myself, this is just how young people talk. Don't take it personally. Yet, in quiet moments, I'd sit on the edge of my bed and remember my old home, my old kitchen, my freedom to move about without feeling like a guest. I'd remind myself that this was temporary, that everything I did was for Emily, for the baby. But deep down, something had shifted. The home that was supposed to be a shared space, a place of warmth and belonging, was slowly becoming a place where I measured my words, watched my actions, and wondered how I'd gone from mom to roommate in someone else's story. I told myself not to overthink it. She's just busy, she's hormonal. Things will go back to normal after the baby comes. but a small, quiet part of me, the part that had seen people's true colors over the years, knew this was the first ripple of something bigger. The morning of Emily's baby shower was a blur of ribbons, frosting, and carefully wrapped gifts. I'd been up since dawn, tying pale yellow bows to the chairs, arranging flower centerpieces, and baking the lemon cake Emily loved. I wanted everything to be perfect for her. The living room was transformed. Pastel balloons floated near the ceiling, a banner that read, "Welcome, Baby," hung over the fireplace, and every surface seemed to sparkle. Jake had brought home trays of food, but I had handled the real details, making sure the decorations matched, the serving dishes were spotless, the drinks were chilled. By noon, the house filled with guests. Friends from Emily's work, neighbors, even Jake's side of the family came in with brightly wrapped presents and cheerful chatter. Emily looked beautiful in her soft blue dress, her hands resting on her baby bump. She moved through the crowd with practiced ease, laughing, thanking everyone for coming. I kept mostly to the background, making sure everyone had something to drink, that the food stayed replenished. I didn't mind. This was her day. Then, as the guests gathered near the living room for speeches, Emily took center stage. She began to thank everyone for coming, her smile radiant. "And I'd like to introduce someone very special," she said, gesturing toward me. I felt a warm flutter in my chest. "This is my roommate, Linda," she continued brightly. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. My smile froze as polite laughter trickled through the room. Roommate. I could feel heat rising to my cheeks. A few guests exchanged curious looks. One woman standing near the gift table leaned toward another and whispered, "Roommate? Really?" I caught the way they looked at me, puzzled, amused. I forced a polite smile, nodding as though nothing was wrong. "Nice to meet you all," I said softly, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest. Emily moved on quickly, thanking Jake's family and talking about the baby's due date. Everyone's attention shifted, but mine didn't. I stood there, a polite fixture in the room, wondering how I had become a supporting character in my own daughter's life. The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze. Guests complimented the food, admired the decorations, and laughed over party games. Emily glowed in the spotlight. I smiled when people looked my way, refilled drinks, and kept busy so no one would see my hands trembling. When the last guest left, Emily and Jake stayed in the living room, sorting through gifts and chatting about the party. I quietly slipped away to my room. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, my hands pressed flat against the wood, as if to keep the day out. My chest felt heavy, my stomach twisted in knots. Roommate. I sat on the edge of the bed, my mind replaying every little moment from the past months. The guest room, the kitchen curfew, the casual comments about staying here for now. I thought about selling my home, handing over the money that helped them get this house, the countless meals, the laundry folded, the nights I stayed up just to make sure Emily was comfortable. All of it. And yet in front of her friends and family, I was nothing more than a roommate. I stared at the framed picture on my nightstand. Emily as a little girl, her hair in braids, holding my hand at the park. I could almost hear her voice from years ago. "I love you, Mommy." I pressed my lips together, refusing to cry. Out in the living room, I could hear Emily's laughter mingling with Jake's. They were still talking about the party, about the baby. The sound of their voices made the walls feel thinner, the air heavier. They had no idea what they had done. Maybe they didn't think it mattered. Maybe they thought it was just a harmless word. But words carry weight, and that word, spoken so publicly, carried the weight of erasure. I thought about how everyone had looked at me. Not as a mother, not as a woman who had sacrificed her home and her comfort, but as someone renting a room, a guest, an outsider. Lying back on the bed, I stared at the ceiling, my mind churning. Was this really just a slip of the tongue? Or was there something more behind it? The pieces started falling into place. The roommate comment in the store with Claire, the careful avoidance of the word mom in public, the way Jake laughed about me staying here. I could feel a small, cold realization forming in the pit of my stomach. They weren't just being casual, they were crafting a narrative. And in that narrative, I wasn't family. That night, I couldn't sleep. The word roommate echoed in my mind, but it wasn't just the word. It was the way Emily said it, so effortlessly, as though it was simply the truth. I found myself replaying conversations from months ago. The day I sold my home, the signing at the title office, the way Emily had said, "It'll just be easier if we put the house in both our names, Mom." You know, for the mortgage approval. At the time, I'd agreed, but I remember the moment at the office clearly. The paperwork had listed only one name in the owner section, mine. When I asked the agent, she'd smiled and said, "That's fine, we'll handle the rest later if you decide to add someone else." But we never did. The memory gnawed at me. Why was I suddenly so uneasy about something that had seemed harmless then? The next morning, after Emily left for a prenatal appointment, I pulled out my old phone contacts and called Ms. Harris, the attorney who had handled my husband's estate. She picked up after 2 rings, her voice warm and professional. "Linda, it's been a while. How are you?" "I'm fine," I said, though my voice felt thin. "I need a favor. Do you still have access to the deed for Emily's house? The one I helped pay for?" There was a pause as she clicked away on her keyboard. "Yes, I see it here. Linda, you are the sole legal owner. There's no co-signature from Emily or Jake." I sat there, my hand tightening around the phone. "Are you certain?" I asked, my voice low. 100%. If you wanted to sell the house tomorrow, you could. No one else's permission is required." A strange, quiet calm washed over me. "Thank you, Ms. Harris. That's all I needed to know," I said, and ended the call. So it was true. This house, the one where I was called a roommate, legally belonged to me, and Emily and Jake either didn't know or had conveniently forgotten. I decided to keep this knowledge to myself, for now. Over the next week, I began to notice more subtle things. Jake spending long hours on his laptop, hushed conversations between him and Emily that would stop abruptly when I entered the room. One afternoon, while they were out, I decided to do something I hadn't done since moving in. Open the desk drawers in the small home office. It was mostly bills, envelopes, and the usual clutter. But near the back of the drawer, I found a folder marked, simply, Finances. I hesitated. I told myself I wasn't snooping. I was protecting my future. Inside were credit card statements, some unopened. I scanned the pages, my eyes catching on numbers that made my stomach drop. Multiple cards, all with balances in the thousands, late fees, overdue notices. At the bottom of the stack was a printed email exchange between Jake and someone from his bank. The subject line, "Options for debt consolidation." But it was the body of the email that made my chest tighten. "Once the baby is here, we plan to sell the house and clear all outstanding balances. My wife's mother will be moving out by then, so there won't be any complications." I read the sentence 3 times, each word cutting deeper than the last. Moving out, so this was the plan. After everything I'd done, they were already imagining a future without me in it. I set the papers back exactly as I'd found them, my hands steady, though my heart was pounding. Emily had to know. She wasn't naive, and if she knew about the debt and the plan, she'd chosen to keep it from me. That evening, over dinner, I watched her carefully. She laughed with Jake, talked about baby names, acted as though everything was fine. But I noticed the way she avoided eye contact when certain topics came up, like money or plans for the future. I realized then that the roommate label wasn't just casual wording. It was strategic. If I wasn't seen as family, it would be easier to push me out when the time came. I ate in silence, letting them talk, nodding where appropriate. They didn't notice how quiet I was. Later, in the privacy of my room, I sat at my small desk and made a list. House deed in my name, Jake's debt, Emily's knowledge of the debt, their plan to sell after the baby. Piece by piece, the picture was forming. I had spent my life teaching my students about the importance of preparation. It was time I took my own advice. I wouldn't confront them yet. Not until I was ready. Not until I could make my point in a way they'd never forget. A week after discovering Jake's debt, I walked into the kitchen one morning to find Emily and Jake huddled over his laptop. Their voices were low, and the moment they saw me, the conversation stopped mid-sentence. Jake closed the lid almost too quickly. Emily smiled, her tone overly bright. "Morning, Mom. Coffee's fresh if you want some." I nodded, pretending not to notice. "Thanks." I knew that look. It was the same expression she wore when she was a teenager hiding something from me. Like the time she tried to sneak out to a concert she wasn't allowed to attend. Later that day, when they left for a doctor's appointment, I walked past the office. The laptop was gone, but on the desk sat a stack of printed papers, some of which were carelessly tucked into an open folder labeled Plans. I hesitated for a moment. My heart pounded as I reached for the papers. The first few pages were ordinary. Budget spreadsheets, estimated baby expenses. But then I saw it. A printed email chain between Emily and Jake. The subject line read, "Future plans after baby arrives." Jake had written, "Once Mom is settled somewhere else, we'll list the house. We should be able to cover all outstanding balances and have a fresh start." Emily replied, "Yes, but we have to handle it carefully. I don't want to fight. She's been comfortable here, so it's better if we keep everything gentle, as though easing me out of the home I had paid for was an act of kindness. I set the papers down, my hand steady but my mind spinning. They weren't just thinking about selling the house, they were planning the timeline. And the first step in that plan was me, out of the way. I returned to my room, needing air. Sitting at my desk, I reached for the small fireproof box I kept tucked under the bed. It held a few of my most important documents, my will, some old photographs, and the life insurance paperwork from my late husband, Mark. I hadn't looked at those papers in years, but as I unfolded them, I realized something I'd forgotten. A portion of Mark's life insurance payout, the money meant for me, had been used as the down payment on this house. The realization hit me hard. I hadn't just been disrespected. I had been financially exploited. The house wasn't just in my name. It was built partly on the foundation of money meant for my security, my future. I sat there in silence, the truth settling over me like a heavy blanket. That night at dinner, Emily and Jake chatted about nursery paint colors and baby names. I smiled, nodded, even suggested a few ideas. Inside, I was filing away every piece of information, every expression, every word they spoke. They didn't suspect a thing. It was tempting to confront them right there, to put the deed on the table and demand answers. But I knew better. A confrontation now would only lead to denials, excuses, maybe even hostility. No, if I was going to address this, I would do it on my terms, at my time, in a way they could never brush aside. I decided the best moment would be when the audience was just right, and I already knew the perfect occasion, the next baby shower event. It would be the stage where Emily had introduced me as her roommate. How fitting it would be for me to return the favor with the truth. Over the following days, I began preparing quietly. First, I visited Miss Harris again, asking her to prepare certified copies of the deed and all relevant documents proving my ownership. Second, I gathered proof of where the money came from, including the insurance payout paperwork. I tucked everything into a discreet leather folder. I also began rehearsing my words in my head. I didn't want anger to cloud my voice. I wanted clarity, precision. The truth alone would be enough to dismantle their narrative. Each evening, I continued my role as the supportive mother, cooking, helping Emily with her swelling ankles, tidying the house. On the surface, everything looked normal, but beneath that surface, I was quietly assembling my pieces on the chessboard. And when the moment came, I would make my move. The second baby shower was meant to be a smaller gathering, just family and close friends who hadn't been able to attend the first. Emily insisted on hosting it at home again, and I agreed quietly, already knowing what I intended to do. The house looked as festive as before, pastel streamers curling from the ceiling, gifts stacked neatly in the corner. Emily glowed in her pale lavender dress, her hand resting on her belly as she moved from one group of guests to another. I kept my smile calm, my leather folder discreetly tucked under my chair. When it came time for her to speak, Emily gathered everyone's attention. "I just want to thank all of you for being here again. It means so much to Jake and me." She glanced toward me with a practiced smile. "And I'd like to introduce my roommate, Linda." The word slid from her mouth as easily as it had the first time, light and casual. There were polite chuckles, a few curious glances. I stood slowly, my palms steady. I smiled, not the brittle kind, but the kind that comes from knowing the truth is finally about to surface. "Actually," I said, my voice calm, "this roommate owns the house you're standing in." The room fell silent. Eyes turned toward me. Emily's smile froze. Jake's expression tightened. I reached for the leather folder and opened it with deliberate care, pulling out the deed. The papers looked ordinary, but the weight of them was anything but. "This," I continued, holding up the certified copy, "is the legal deed to this property. Sole ownership. My name, not Emily's, not Jake's." I let the words settle in the air. Emily's face flushed pink. "Mom," she began, but I raised a hand gently. "I'm not finished." I pulled out another set of papers. "And this," I said, "is documentation of the life insurance payout from your father. Money that went into the down payment for this home. Money that was entrusted to me for my security. Which means this house was built, quite literally, on the foundation of our family and my sacrifices." The silence deepened. For a moment, no one moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. Jake shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Emily. A few guests exchanged surprised looks, some with raised brows, others with tight lips. I closed the folder, placed it on the table beside me, and looked around the room. "I've stayed quiet," I said evenly, "because I wanted to believe this was just a misunderstanding. But when I'm introduced as a roommate, twice and guy in my own home, it's clear some people need a reminder of the truth. And the truth is simple. Respect is the foundation of family." Emily opened her mouth, but no words came. She looked down, her hands trembling slightly. Jake cleared his throat. "Linda, we didn't mean—" But the murmurs from the guests cut him off. One of Emily's aunts leaned toward another relative, whispering just loud enough for the words to carry. "Imagine calling your mother a roommate in her own house." Jake's jaw tightened. He looked around the room, clearly aware of the judgment settling over them. Emily tried again, her voice small. "Mom, it was just, I didn't want to explain everything to everyone." "Then you could have just called me your mother," I replied calmly. "It's not complicated." Her eyes glistened, but I could see the battle behind them. Pride wrestling with shame. The guests began to shift, conversations murmuring in small groups. A few people offered me approving nods. Others kept their eyes on Emily and Jake, waiting for their reaction. Jake put a hand on Emily's shoulder, but she pulled away slightly, her face pale. I didn't press further. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The document spoke louder than any argument could. After a few moments, I turned to the guests with a warm but measured smile. "Please, enjoy the rest of the afternoon. This is a celebration for the baby, after all." I stepped back, leaving the air thick with unspoken truths. Emily remained seated, her eyes downcast. Jake busied himself with the drinks table, his back turned. The tension was palpable. but underneath it all, I felt an unfamiliar lightness. The quiet relief of knowing the truth was finally out, that the narrative had shifted back to where it belonged. The days after the second baby shower were quiet in a way I hadn't expected. Emily avoided the word roommate entirely, and her tone toward me softened. I could see the weight of what had happened settling on her. Not just the embarrassment in front of friends and family, but the truth that could no longer be ignored. One afternoon, she knocked softly on my bedroom door. "Mom, can we talk?" I looked up from the book in my lap and gestured for her to sit. She perched on the edge of the bed, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I thought it was easier, keeping things simple in front of people, but I see now how it must have felt for you." Her voice wavered. This wasn't an easy apology, but it was genuine. "I'm glad you understand," I said gently. "But understanding also means things have to change. I love you, Emily. I'll help you with the baby, with the house, but my place here and my contributions deserve respect." She nodded quickly. "They do. I haven't been fair. I'll do better." Jake was quieter, but I noticed changes in him too. He no longer made small jokes about me staying here. He began taking extra shifts, and one evening I overheard him on the phone, negotiating payment plans for his credit card debt. He didn't say it outright, but I understood the unspoken message. He was working to stand on his own feet to ease the strain I had unknowingly carried for them. Over time, the atmosphere in the house shifted. Small things changed. Emily invited me to sit beside her during visits from friends, openly calling me Mom. She started involving me in discussions about the nursery, the baby's schedule, even asking for my opinion on financial decisions. I didn't let these changes go to my head. Respect, once neglected, needs consistent care to grow back. But I could feel the balance in the house becoming healthier. One evening, we all sat in the living room. Emily rested her feet on the ottoman, her belly round under her dress, while Jake worked quietly on his laptop. "Mom," Emily said suddenly, "I was thinking, after the baby's born, maybe we could all set some boundaries together. About the house, about finances. I think it would help us avoid misunderstandings." I smiled faintly. "That's a very good idea." It wasn't about control anymore. It was about clarity, something we had lacked before. Weeks later, the baby arrived, and the house filled with a different kind of energy. My days were busier, but the weight on my shoulders felt lighter. I wasn't an invisible presence in the home anymore. I was a mother, a grandmother, and a homeowner, with my place clearly acknowledged. Jake, true to his word, worked on paying down his debts. He stopped talking about selling the house and started talking about making it a home for everyone. There were still moments of tension, no family changes overnight, but we faced them with a new kind of honesty. As the months passed, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. I'd sold my home, moved in to help my daughter, and in the process, lost sight of my own worth. It wasn't intentional, but it was easy to slip into the role of helper, caretaker, guest. And then came that moment, the introduction as roommate, that made me realize how easily respect can be eroded when boundaries aren't clear. One afternoon, while the baby napped, I sat in the sunlit kitchen with a cup of tea and my laptop. I typed out my story, not as a rant, but as a reflection. I wrote about the importance of setting boundaries, about protecting your rights even with the people you love most. I shared how painful it was to feel invisible in your own family and how powerful it felt to reclaim your place, not with shouting, but with truth. I posted it in a community group for older women. The responses came quickly. Messages of support, shared experiences, and words of encouragement from mothers who had gone through something similar. I realized I wasn't alone. Sometimes when new members in the group ask me for advice, I tell them this: you can share your home, your time, your love. but never give away your respect. Once you give that up, it's harder to get back. Protect it gently but firmly. I look at Emily now, holding her baby, and I see a daughter who has learned something important too. She doesn't just thank me for what I do, she acknowledges who I am. The house feels different now, not because of the walls or the furniture, but because the foundation, respect, Twitter, is finally solid.